Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one a fascinating one because it's almost like a treasure hunt, a real life treasure hunt that to this day still hasn't been found. So there's a chance out there, those of you that are listening to this video, if you decide to go on this treasure hunt, who knows, you may actually find this long lost urban legend. And if so, it could be one that could make you absolutely just rich. But beware, there's a lot of danger involved and more on the superstition side, some kind of let's say risk involving the supernatural. So it all has to do with this. It's the urban legend known as the Lost Dutchman's Mine. I'm going to talk about the origin, the real origin, like in other words when it really first started, and then also where the name the Lost Dutchman's Mine comes from itself. And then I'll give some good examples too as to some of the superstitious stuff associated with this area. So what is this Lost Dutchman's Mine? Well, there's actually several locations throughout several states that you can include it. Like if you actually take into consideration all of the urban legends that are near to each other in terms of being similar. But in this case, there's one that stands out, and it's one that's located at a place called Superstitions Mountains, there near a place called Apache Junction in Phoenix, Arizona. You're looking, in fact, at some pictures here of the Superstitions Mountains. It's a range of mountains altogether that go through a vast landscape. Some of them, in fact, look like things like almost like something created them. Like there's one involving the praying hands, which almost looks like rocks that are formed together that look like praying hands. But one of them that stands out the most is the actual Superstition Mountain, like the main mountain located there. This is a mountain that is the biggest one of them all. It's the one that's front and center. It's almost like, as I read in an article, almost like it's guarding the entire place. But yes, as far as the history of this legend, it all starts a couple of hundred years back, in fact. In fact, you have to go back to about the mid 1500s to be specific, when the very first Spanish arrived in that area. Way before that time, though, there were the Apache Indians that lived in that location. And like a lot of locations that they had there, they considered this area to be sacred ground. And most likely it had to do, of course, with the nature of the Apache Indians, how they took very, very careful, let's say consideration of their land, what they considered to be sacred, the formations as well. They said that there was some kind of god, a thunder god, that roamed those grounds, and they certainly made sure to not do anything to make this god mad. They considered it completely just outright sacred ground. So when they saw the Spanish arrive and then just basically walk on that ground as is, not taking into any consideration involving everything I just mentioned, then obviously the Apache Indians, they got mad. To them, they did not want the Spaniards exploring this area. They did not want them especially trying to take anything there. The reason that they were there in the first place was, interestingly enough, those Spaniards were in turn trying to find a lost city of gold. It was something called the Seven Golden Cities of Cibola. So very fascinating stuff. Know how the origin of this Lost Dutchman mine actually came from, in this case, another legend involving a golden city. Well, they didn't find the golden cities, but they did find some gold throughout here and there. Now, whether this is just truly by pure happen chance, you know how there's areas throughout the United States or up north, especially by Alaska, that'll have gold, and when you find it there, that doesn't mean that there's going to be like an entire city full of gold, like a quote-unquote city, but still it'll be just gold that just happens to be there. Well, as luck has it, the Spaniards found the gold, and then they decided to try to find more of it. That's where greed comes into play. In fact, you'll hear about that more here in a minute, how several of these tales all involve greed. Of course, the Apache Indians were not having this, and they were starting to attack the Spaniards. At first, they gave warnings, and then, of course, the Spaniards ignored them, and so they started to attack them. And when that happened, that's when the Spaniards realized, you know what, this is something pretty bad, because they were suffering horrible deaths. People were missing, others were found, but they were found with their bodies mutilated, heads cut off, that kind of stuff. It wasn't known at the time if it was truly the Indians, like the Apache Indians themselves doing it, or if it was a combination of this thunder god and the superstition around it. So much so, in fact, that that area, the Apache Indians labeled it as the Devil's Playground. Who knows what was there, but whatever it was, it may have been causing these deaths. And the Spaniards themselves at one point got so freaked out about this that they warned everyone never leave more than a few feet away of each other, and even then people were still somehow disappearing. So they left, these conquistadors left and then did not come back to the mountain, and everything was kind of okay for a little bit. But then cut to a little bit later, around the mid 1700s or so, and this land was eventually sold to a Mexican baron by the name of Don Miguel Peralta of Sonora, and it was through a very large purchase. So this guy owned all the entire area there, including the Superstition Mountains. Well, lo and behold, this guy also was there and heard about the gold, about the legends of the location there, about these cities filled with gold. So he decided to try to find something close to it, and he did. Apparently, he did find some mine, a mine that was filled with gold with inside it. So maybe it was one of those pocketfuls of gold that just happened to stay there for who knows how long. But he found it, and so him, his family, and a bunch of laborers, they lived in an area nearby, and they would frequently come into that location and then go into the Superstition Mountains, bring out loads of gold, and then come back and then repeat that cycle over and over as much as they could. Still, though, the Apache Indians there, obviously they did not like the sale of the land. They did not like this guy, his family, his workers still being there. So they did this as discreetly as possible, trying to get this gold, trying to make sure they could get as much as they could, while at the same time keeping themselves safe from everything that was happening. And it worked for a little while. It seemed like they were able to do so. And keep things safe. But again, greed comes into play. For some of the family members later on, in fact, for the other family members, some descendants, they decided, you know what, I don't care about this curse. I don't care about the risk about the Indians there. I just want more gold. So they decided to take even more trips. And part of this was a pressure from the upcoming, or at the time, what was happening, the Mexican War with the U.S. There was the idea that they could lose the land. And so when that could happen, when they lose the land to the United States, obviously they'd lose the gold as well. So they decided to do one more trip. They decided to pack up as much as they could. They went out there, but lo and behold, the curse took place. And what happened was they were attacked. These descendants were attacked by the Apache Indians. And the mules that they had that were filled with gold. Remember, this was like the one last trip, almost like one of those movies that you see where there's always like that one last crime to commit. Well, here was theirs. They packed the mules with gold. They were carrying it back, but they were attacked. And when they did so, they were all killed, all of them. In fact, even the donkeys there, the mules, were killed as well. And the way the legend goes was this mine that was found was now lost because all the instructions, everything as far as how to get there, any maps, anything else associated with it became lost with this attack, and no one else knew the information. And the Peralta family, the members that lived outside of that area, they decided they're not going to do anything else as well within that mine. They're not going to take any more chances afterwards. So as far as, any kind of idea of like where this mine was, the last known members of the Peralta family that knew about it, they were the ones that were killed by those Apache Indians, and the mines were lost. In fact, the way it was described was on this last trip, before they decided to leave, away from that place, they sealed it because they didn't want the upcoming United States citizens to be able to find this location, so they concealed it. But that unfortunately led to the lost translation of this mine as well, because no one else knows where it was afterward. And then as far as another supposed curse, another thing happening as well is this. There was a guy by the name of Dr. Abraham Thorne, who, now that this area was owned by the U.S., there was a fort that was going to be built there, Fort McDowell. And this fort would house army doctors, and lo and behold, he was one as well. So he decided to be there. He helped out the soldiers, but interestingly enough, he also helped out the Indians. Any Apache Indians there that were sick or that were injured from any kind of battle, he helped them out too, which is pretty nice of him to do so. And he was in fact so heralded by these Apache Indians that they decided to give him an olive branch of sorts. They told him, "We will show you," because they knew, but they told him, "We will show you where this gold mine is. But in order for us to do so, we will have to conceal it." So basically, they put a blindfold on him and they led him about 20 miles, is what he estimated, over to some concealed area. And when he was there, they took off the blindfold, and that's where he saw it. He saw this legendary mine. Apparently, it's inside some kind of large canyon. There was an unusual rock formation somewhere towards the south. And when he looked around, he saw oodles and oodles of gold. So much, in fact, that it was nowhere, nothing that he had ever seen in terms of all these large quantities of gold. And so they told him he could carry and leave as much as he could with, and that was it. So whatever he could hold, that's the gold that would be his. And then that was it. There was like a one-time trip as a nice thank you for him helping them out with their injuries and helping them with their sickness. And so he did so. He took about $6,000 back, which was a lot of money back then, worth of gold. But again, greed comes into play. Remember, I keep mentioning that word. This doctor decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and go back into that location because I want to be able to find more gold. This will make, my life, essentially. And so he decided to return to another trip. But guess what? He was found again by the Apache Indians, probably another set of Apache Indians who probably didn't recognize him, or in the heat of a battle didn't realize that it was him, and he was killed right then and there. So whether he found that gold or not, it just goes to show again how greed comes into play. And as far as why it's called the Lost Dutchman's Mine, it has to do with this. There was a gentleman by the name of Jacob Waltz who lived around that area in the 1870s. Apparently, he relocated there from another place, and when he was there in Arizona, he decided to set up a place, almost like a gold manufacturing or gold finding business. That was his thing. It was called the Dutchman Gold Mine, is basically, and he was setting it there, and he became romantically linked with an Apache girl. So someone from that tribe, from that same set of Apache Indians, he became romantically linked, and her name was Kenti. And she apparently told him about the location, about where it's at as far as this gold mine. And when he went there, he found the gold, and he was able to extract some of it. But the other Apache Indians found out about this betrayal, or what they felt was a betrayal, and they attacked. In fact, that poor girl, apparently they cut off her tongue as a way of retribution, as a way of silencing her for the betrayal that she did. And then Mr. Jacob Waltz, ran away at that same time. So they were not able to get him, but they definitely got this poor girl. And then afterward, he decided to set up shop elsewhere. And eventually, people started to realize this guy, Jacob Waltz, still has gold. People were stating that he would come in to a certain city's location every now and then, and he would find, he would bring in large amounts of gold to sell. He always had something to sell afterwards. So rumors spread, maybe he knew where the gold was again, that he was visiting it, even though obviously, he had a lucky break with the last go around. And so people tried to follow him to see where it was, but no, as far as trying to tail him, no, he saw that what people were doing, and he was able to lose them left and right. So no one truly was able to find out where exactly he was heading. But for the next 10 years, he would appear and disappear, always with those large saddlebags of gold. But on one fateful day at his home, that location he was at, he experienced a very large flood. And the way the story goes is this flood completely destroyed his home and almost killed him outright. He was saved by a woman and two guys. What the lady's name was Julia Thomas, and the guys' names were brothers. They were Herman and Reinhard Petrasch. They took him back to their place, but it was too late. This guy, Mr. Jacob, had contracted pneumonia, and he was slowly but surely dying from his sickness. And throughout that time, I think it took a couple of months, in fact, but throughout that time, he was able to tell them bits and pieces, almost as a nice thank you. Hey, here's where the gold is. Here's where it's located. In fact, here's where the gold is at my house as well. And they were able to go back to his destroyed home, and they found proof. Like, they found about $15,000 worth of gold there. And finally, he ended up passing away. But before he passed, he did not mention anything else as far as like any kind of specific location. No maps, no specific areas to look for, mountain ranges, discernible signs, nothing like that. So that's why it's called the Lost Dutchman's Mine. It all has to do with him, because people at that time associated German immigrants with the word Dutch, and so they called him Dutchman, and so they attributed his mine as being the Lost Dutchman's Mine. So interesting stuff, no? All those other tales that I was mentioning earlier about the conquistadors, about the doctor, about the Mexican baron who owned all that land, all that didn't stick, but it was this guy, in this case Jacob Waltz's encounter, that eventually became the Lost Dutchman Mine. So as far as where this mine is, who knows? Apparently there have been hundreds of thousands of people that have tried to find this mine throughout all these years, and nobody has been able to do so. People visit that location, the Superstition Mountains, and then in particular that spot, the Superstition Mountain itself. But when they do so, it's with extreme danger, because, again, you could get lost within that area. There's no discernible way to try to keep track of it unless you're really, really good about this stuff. And then also, you could also get injured taking a slip and a fall into one of those cracks or crevices, and then you're done. Like, no one will hear you, no one will find you, and there you are in the desert, practically 100-degree weather, and then very, very cold nights, and you're stuck with like a broken leg or something else even worse. And that's how so many people have fallen to this quote-unquote curse. Whether there's any kind of superstition involved, who knows? That's always more hearsay along those facts. But considering, again, how the Apache Indians felt on this, and their thunder god as well, that you do have to consider that stuff. In fact, that reminded me of this story I was reading one time. I'll see if I can find the link, and if so, I'll include it below. But it was a story that I was reading about these mountains that were infamous for having some kind of supernatural entity there, and people were warned not to go into those mountains. It was somewhere there in Australia, but people would still go, and they would run into this supernatural entity, and in some cases go mad from it, and of course others end up dying. So that's why it reminded me of that too as well. But what do you guys think? Urban legends associated with the Lost Dutchman Mine. Anybody there from the Arizona area? Anybody visit those mountains? They do look beautiful from far away, at least. It would be a great place, like a day trip of sorts, to go there. I'm sure there are tours there too that take you safely around the perimeters, maybe a little bit closer too. But as far as anything else, going in the mountains or going even further into the caves, the mines, whatever you find there, no way. But if anyone has been towards that area and knows more of it on a local standpoint, please post those comments too. It'd be great to hear. Anyone know any more info too about those urban legends, about other curses, other encounters there too? I'll include a link, as I found most of this info from legendsofamerica.com, and there's like 4 pages of these curses of encounters that people have had where they met a fateful demise. So if you wanted to go into a wormhole, check out that link too, and that way you'll be able to see all this info. So all right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.